On December 16, 1944, within the hushed expanse of the Ardennes forest, Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper surveyed his formidable steel beasts, the esteemed Waffe Panzer divisions, as they carved their way through the American defenses. For the initial hours, it appeared that the Führer's audacious gamble might indeed prove successful. His elite unit, a vanguard in Hitler's final grand offensive, sowed widespread disarray. However, Peiper's focus was not on the unfolding enemy engagement, but rather on the dwindling readings of his fuel gauges. Each strain and lurch of his Tiger and Panther tanks inexorably depleted their vital gasoline reserves. This precious commodity stood as the sole determinant between a decisive breakthrough and a frozen, inert monument of steel. The entirety of this offensive, Germany's last desperate hope, was founded upon daring, surprise, and a fervent prayer for fuel. They had been assured that the enemy would inadvertently fuel their advance, that the complacent and weak-willed Americans would readily relinquish their vast stores. And there, amidst the snow-laden Belgian woodlands, Peiper's soldiers would indeed unearth an astounding windfall, a colossal American fuel depot. For a fleeting instant, it would feel like divine intervention. Yet, that perceived miracle was a fabrication. The discovery would not herald salvation, but rather a soul-crushing revelation, a mathematical certainty of their impending doom, demonstrating conclusively how American logistical prowess would dismantle Hitler's final aspiration. By the autumn of 1944, the Third Reich found itself under immense pressure. To the east, the Red Army advanced like an unstoppable juggernaut, relentlessly pushing towards Berlin. In the west, Allied forces stood poised at Germany's very doorstep. For the German High Command, the situation was dire, bordering on catastrophic. Yet, within the mind of Adolf Hitler, it served as the canvas for one last, monumental work of destruction. His strategy was so audacious, it verged on the irrational. Codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein, it entailed 3 German armies, spearheaded by his most capable panzer divisions, smashing through a perceived vulnerability in the American lines within the Ardennes. Their objective was to breach the Meuse River, effectively cleaving the British and American forces apart, and subsequently seizing the crucial port of Antwerp. Its capture was paramount. Hitler not only believed this would cripple the Allied supply chain, but he also promised his generals that Antwerp's immense stockpiles would be used to re-equip his own depleted forces. This reliance on captured provisions was not merely a component of the plan, it was the plan itself. Germany was rapidly exhausting its resources. Allied aerial bombardments had systematically devastated the Reich's synthetic fuel production, reducing it by an astonishing 90%. The vital oil fields of pesty Romania now lay under Soviet control. The repercussions were far-reaching. The once mighty Luftwaffe was largely grounded, its advanced aircraft unable to fly for want of kerosene. On the home front, civilian vehicles were a rare sight. The Gestapo hunted black market gasoline dealers with the ferocity typically reserved for traders. The sheer disparity in production figures tells a stark story. In 1944, Germany's entire war economy yielded approximately 33 million barrels of oil. In that same year, the United States alone produced 1.8 billion barrels. A single oil field in East Texas surpassed the output of all of German-controlled Europe. While American refineries experimented with byproducts to manage surplus crude oil, German quartermasters grappled with agonizing decisions, determining which tanks could be deployed and which had to be left immobile. German generals estimated they possessed barely enough fuel for 1/3 of the planned journey to Antwerp. The remainder, they were assured, would be supplied by the enemy. The odds were undeniably stacked against them as the panzers wumbled into the snow, clinging to a desperate hope. The armored spearhead of the offensive was the 6th Panzer Army, commanded by SS General Sepp Dietrich, with its sharpest point being KG Kampfgruppe Peiper. Peiper and his men epitomized the Nazi military ideal: fanatically devoted, battle-hardened, and equipped with some of the war's most formidable fighting machines. Their armaments represented the apex predators of the German arsenal: the Tiger II and the Panther. The Tiger II, with its thick, sloped armor and immense 88mm gun, was virtually impervious to any Allied tank confronting it head-on. The Panther, arguably the war's finest all-around tank, shared a critical, insatiable appetite. Peiper was acutely aware that each of his Tiger IIs consumed approximately 2.5 gallons of gasoline for every single mile it advanced. In the challenging terrain of the Ardennes, this figure could easily double. For every gallon of fuel an American Sherman tank consumed, a Tiger II burned 3. For a nation devoid of fuel, fielding an army of such gas guzzlers presented a paradox stemming from a flawed philosophy: the belief that superior quality could invariably overcome inferior quantity. However, this philosophy overlooked a fundamental reality: a tank that cannot move is merely an expensive, static fortification. Keeping them operational was a logistical nightmare. The diverse array of vehicles within a panzer division, once a strategic advantage, now necessitated different fuels and parts for their varied engines. Countless trucks were indispensable for transporting fuel to the front lines, each one a prime target for Allied fighter bombers, the dreaded Jabos that dominated the skies. By December 1944, the German supply chain was a testament to desperation. Fuel was siphoned from damaged vehicles. Captured Allied jeeps were immediately drained. A commander like Peiper might command nearly 100 tanks, but if he only had sufficient fuel to move 30, his force was effectively incapacitated. The strategy dictated that these fuel-hungry predators would sustain themselves from the land, drawing sustenance from the enemy's arteries. They were envisioned as hunters released into the wild, expected to be nourished by their prey. While Germany subsisted on mere fumes, America waged a global war fueled by an abundant geyser of petroleum. To the American quartermasters, fuel was as essential as air, seemingly always readily available. The colossal system that facilitated this abundance was one of the war's greatest achievements. At its core was the Red Ball Express. When Allied armies advanced with such speed that they outran their supply lines, the solution was a continuous, 24-hour convoy of trucks operating on a one-way loop with roads closed to all other traffic. At its zenith, nearly 6,000 trucks, primarily driven by African American soldiers, became the lifeblood of the advance. In a mere 82 days, they delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies. The operation itself was so immense that it consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel daily simply to keep its own trucks operational. A German army group commander would have been moved to tears witnessing such a quantity of fuel. But this was merely one facet. An even more extraordinary feat was Operation Pluto, a system of pipelines laid beneath the ocean. Flexible 3-inch pipelines were extended across the English Channel, pumping a constant, unyielding river of fuel directly to the continent. From coastal depots, smaller pipelines branched out, tracing the Army's movements like a circulatory system, delivering hundreds of thousands of gallons daily to the front. The scale of this undertaking is staggering. In late 1944, Allied forces in Northwest Europe consumed 7.5 million gallons of fuel per day. The U.S. First Army, the very force facing the German onslaught, maintained a reserve of 3.5 million gallons. A single one of the larger pipelines alone could deliver 300,000 gallons daily. This was not merely a numerical advantage. It fundamentally altered the Allied mindset. American commanders planned operations with the reassuring certainty that fuel was a given. While German generals agonized over every kilometer, American generals envisioned campaigns spanning entire countries. This relentless tide of petroleum was about to collide with the sputtering advance of the Panzers. On December 16th, the Ardennes witnessed a violent rupture. The German offensive achieved complete tactical surprise. Through the gaps in the American lines surged the men and machines of Kampfgruppe Peiper. The advance became a desperate race against their own fuel tanks. Then, near the village of Hansfeld, they struck gold. Overrunning a staging area for an American armored division, they discovered it, a United States fuel and supply depot. To the fuel-starved German soldiers, it was paradise. After years of scrounging for every last drop of foul-smelling ersatz fuel, they found themselves in a forest transformed into a monument of industrial abundance. A German officer observed walls of sturdy American-made jerry cans stacked 10 feet high, forming long corridors between the trees. The air, thick with pine and snow, now carried the sharp, intoxicating aroma of high-grade 80-plus octane gasoline, a world away from the 74-octane fuel their own engines were forced to endure. The initial reports were euphoric: 50,000 gallons. This single, minor capture represented more fuel than many German divisions had seen in months. It was sufficient to refuel Peiper's entire battle group and propel their dash towards the Meuse River. The soldiers were ecstatic, viewing it as an auspicious omen. The decadent Americans, they believed, were careless with their wealth, and the disciplined German soldier would seize it for his triumph. For a brief period in that frigid forest, it seemed as though the gamble was paying off. Hope, a resource even scarcer than fuel, surged through the ranks. They had discovered their El Dorado. The elation was intoxicating. However, as German officers began organizing their miraculous bounty, a chilling, unsettling sensation began to permeate. Among the crates of rations and ammunition, they found discarded American newspapers. On the jerry cans themselves, they discovered shipping manifests. A logistics officer would have viewed these documents with escalating dread. The newspapers were recent. The manifests detailed an almost unbelievable journey. These jerry cans, filled with gasoline refined in distant Texas, had crossed the Atlantic, been unloaded in France, and transported by truck to this forward depot in less than 6 weeks. This was not some forgotten cache. It was a single drop from a continuously flowing river. The true psychological collapse occurred with an even more significant revelation. They learned about the Allied pipeline system. They discovered that a single pipe, one of several feeding the front, could deliver 300,000 gallons of fuel daily. A German Panzer division might consume that amount in a month of intense combat. Here was an invisible conduit buried underground, delivering more fuel in 24 hours than an armored division could realistically hope for in 30 days. Suddenly, that 50,000-gallon windfall appeared pathetic. It was not a strategic prize, it was pocket change. It was akin to a millionaire dropping a $20 bill on the sidewalk and not bothering to retrieve it. The Americans had not lost this fuel. Its absence was a mere inconvenience. For years, German propaganda had portrayed America as a soft, mongrel nation incapable of total war. That deception now lay shattered in the snow. As one German soldier later recounted, there was a profound demoralization, a mixture of awe and despair at the sheer material wealth of the American soldier. How could one possibly defeat an enemy who treated a treasure that could sustain an entire army as little more than a rounding error? The discovery of that fuel depot marked the moment they knew with cold certainty that the war was already lost. This transition from tactical victory to strategic despair is one of the most captivating aspects of the Battle of the Bulge. It underscores that wars are not solely won on the battlefield, but also on the factory floor and within the minds of the combatants. The true, mind-boggling extent of America's power was not exemplified by the fuel the Germans found, but by the fuel they were systematically denied. American commanders made a simple, ruthless calculation. If the Germans required their fuel, that fuel had to be destroyed. What followed was an act of material annihilation so profound, so alien to the German mentality, that it stands as one of the ultimate displays of military power in history. Near Stavelot, directly in Peiper's path, lay another depot, not of 50,000 gallons, but containing 2.5 million gallons of gasoline. As Peiper's tanks drew nearer, a small contingent of American engineers received their orders: destroy it all. Imagine the German perspective. Your tanks are running on empty. Your nation's final hope is grinding to a halt. Then, over the next rise, you witness a pillar of black smoke. You hear a roar, and you observe American soldiers methodically opening the spigots on thousands of fuel drums, allowing the precious liquid to pour into ditches before igniting it. At Stavelot, at Malmedy, at Spa, the narrative was identical. American engineers opened valves and tossed in grenades. An estimated 8 million gallons went up in flames in the first week of the battle alone. That single week of deliberate destruction represented more gasoline than the German High Command had allocated for the entire Ardennes offensive. To the Germans, it was incomprehensible waste, akin to watching a starving man burn down a granary. To the Americans, it was sound doctrine. The loss was inconsequential. The supply chain was already compensating. On December 17th, the U.S. First Army destroyed 2.2 million gallons. The very next day, 1.8 million gallons were delivered to them. By Christmas Eve, their total fuel reserves had actually increased since the battle commenced. This act sealed the fate of KG Peiper. Hindered by resolute resistance, their promised fuel now reduced to smoke in the sky, their advance faltered and halted near Le Glaise. Peiper's formidable Tiger IIs became immobile steel coffins. On Christmas Eve, he was compelled to abandon them all. Of the 5,000 elite soldiers who initiated the attack, only 800 managed to return to German lines on foot. They were not defeated by superior tanks. They were vanquished by an empty fuel gauge and an adversary who could afford to fight with fire. When the guns fell silent in January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was celebrated as a momentous American victory, and indeed it was. However, it was truly won long before the first shot was fired, in the oil fields of Texas, the factories of Detroit, and the shipyards of California. The Ardennes offensive represented the death throes of the German war machine. It committed its last elite troops and finest armor to the fray, only to lose them all. The most fundamental reason for this failure was logistics. The entire strategy was a fantasy predicated on capturing supplies from an enemy possessing an overwhelming surplus. Let us return to that stark contrast. In 1944, the United States produced over 50 times more crude oil than Germany. While German industry lay in ruins from bombing, Ford's Willow Run factory was manufacturing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. American shipyards were launching cargo vessels at a pace faster than U-boats could sink them. The battles served as the moment this statistical reality transformed into an undeniable psychological truth. It was the brutal demise of the romantic notion that superior will could triumph over material disadvantage. The image of the dashing Panzer ace was rendered obsolete by the anonymous truck driver on the Red Ball Express. As Winston Churchill himself remarked, petroleum moved every operation. Joseph Stalin was more blunt. The war was decided by engines and octane. The German soldiers who stumbled upon that fuel dump believed they had discovered the key to victory. In reality, they had found a yardstick, a measure that delineated the vast, unbridgeable chasm between their depleted nation and the industrial colossus they had so foolishly underestimated. They were fighting with a sword against an enemy wielding an entire production line. The narrative of the Battle of the Bulge and the American fuel depots serves as a microcosm of the entire Second World War. The discovery of that single stockpile, representing more wealth than a German division could comprehend, became a symbol of a conflict that had transcended the battlefield. It was a confrontation between two systems. One was running on the file vestiges of a fanatical ideology. The other was powered by an almost inexhaustible river of industrial production. The shock experienced by the German soldiers was not solely about the fuel. It was the soul-crushing realization that they were engaged with an adversary capable of wasteful expenditure on a scale they could not even imagine. It proved that in modern warfare, the most potent weapon is not always a tank, but the capacity for its endless resupply. What other overlooked aspects of military history do you believe warrant deeper examination? Are there other battles where logistics, rather than tactics, truly dictated the outcome? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this exploration into the industrial sinews of war, please consider subscribing and activating the notification bell.